how do you go from just someone who is an order taker and a subordinate to someone who is more of a partner? And that's really powerful because when you do that, you're equaling out the power dynamic. It's no more that this person is above me, which means they're right about everything.
Right.
It levels it out a little bit. And that's very empowering for you, and it's helpful to your manager.
It's not how things work. But doesn't mean that it's not actually very possible no matter what culture you are in. From the news team at LinkedIn, I'm Jessi Hempel, and this is Hello Monday. It's our show about work on our own terms. Okay, controversial hot take. The most important skill in your career is a skill that no one's going to teach you. It's managing up. Now, I know it gets a bad rap, right? The old school way of thinking about this is being kind of smarmy, complimenting your boss on what they're wearing, even though it's probably something you hate. That's not what I'm talking about. In 2025, managing up is managing yourself well, setting your manager up for success, and setting yourself up for all the growth opportunities. Now, I know you look around and you think that there are some people around you who just seem to know how to do this, that it's intuitive or a talent. Well, it's not. It's actually a skill, and today we're going to get some coaching so that we can all get better at it. Our guest is Melody Wilding. She's an executive coach, and she is a licensed social worker, and it's really the combination of those two things that makes her so incredibly talented at understanding the skills involved in managing up. She has a new book out. It's called Managing Up: How to Get What You Need from the People in Charge. So, what does it mean to manage up, and how do you do it?
I define managing up as navigating relationships with the people who have more positional power than you, namely your boss, but not only your boss.
Right.
And so it's really about getting what you need from the people in charge. I think traditionally over time, when we hear the word managing up, we think 1995 or 1980s office where there's someone running around trying to get the boss's coffee order and laughing at everybody's bad jokes.
Right.
And that's not what managing up is anymore. It's not sucking up. It's not ingratiating yourself. It's really it's something you do for your own benefit, not something you do to please your boss.
In many ways, I think about something that my mother taught me early in my life, which is, Jessi, you need to teach people how to treat you. That's kind of what it's about, right?
You just nailed the main philosophy of the book. That was a phrase I found myself saying to my clients all the time. It's an old therapeutic phrase that us therapists say to people. You teach people how to treat you. So your mom is a very, very wise woman.
So we're going to get into exactly how folks can do this. But before we do that, I want people to understand how you yourself got to this body of work. You just referenced your earliest career days as a therapist. What have you done?
Well, as with most things, I think it's a combination of personal and professional. So yes, from the professional side, I started my career as a therapist. I now have been an executive coach for 13 years. And what I realized was that what was missing from all of my clients being as successful as they wanted to be and less stressed in the way they wanted to be was really understanding the psychological dynamics that were happening at work. They are smart, they are highly skilled people, but they didn't know how to manage their own psychology or influence that of other people. And so that has really driven that sort of undercurrent of my work. And on the personal side, I am a lifelong recovering people pleaser. And, to start the book, in the first chapter, I actually tell a story about how I was laid off and how I believe that really came from my inability to have certain managing up conversations. And that's what the book is based around, 10 managing up conversations. And I had really skipped over aligning myself not just with my boss, but with the organization overall.
Right.
And so I was cut when times came. And so that personal experience, also just really trying to figure out power dynamics and my own relationship with people in authority, combined with the fact that when I would be working with clients, I work with a lot of overthinkers and people pleasers, as we were just mentioning. People would often come to coaching and say, I've written this email to my boss 5 times. And I can't get this out of my head. I can't fall asleep at night. I'm having trouble disconnecting from work. I feel like I'm reactive to everything. I don't know how to push back on requests. And they would blame themselves about this and
It's
say,
me. It's
yeah,
me. It's me.
It's me. I'm an overthinker. I need to be stronger. I need to be tougher. I need to grow a thicker skin. And what I realized is that in actuality, all of those challenges really rolled up to not having the skill set around managing up, which is totally learnable, totally solvable. And I hope that's very freeing for people to hear. We have more power to shape our environment and how people respond to us than we think.
I could not agree with you more. We do have more power to shape the environment than other people think, and most importantly, often than we think that we do. And I want folks to leave here in 20 minutes, half an hour, like confident of the ways in which they can apply this stuff like right away, right? And so you get into 10 conversations. So take us through what the most significant things that we need to take away from this.
I would say the first 5 conversations are the most fundamental. And so the first conversation is about alignment. And that sounds like a very buzzwordy corporate phrase. But what alignment comes down to is knowing that you are working on the right things. You are not spinning your wheels. You are not going to send something to your boss and then they send you back and say, this isn't what I wanted at all. Or why you come to your performance review and your boss says, you're not working on high value work. And so the alignment conversation is really about getting inside your boss's head, because bosses are humans too. They are not always the most articulate or forthcoming, let's say. And so we have to know how to ask good questions to get the information we need to prioritize or channel our energy most effectively.
Now, Melody, I want to get into the people stuff here, okay? Because I know that a lot of folks are listening and thinking, yeah, but like, you haven't met my boss. Right? My boss is a jerk, or my boss does not communicate clearly. And so it starts with that, right? So what advice do you have for those of us who are just like, you just haven't met my boss?
Yes. Let's start with the person who says, my boss can't give me a clear priority to save their life. That happens all the time, right? My boss is so vague. They're always changing directions. One approach you can use there is the trade-off approach. And many times, managing up comes down to saving your leaders cognitive energy. Oftentimes, bosses are stressed, they're unclear, they're vague because they have a million different priorities that we don't even know about. And unfortunately, every person is not good at emotionally regulating themselves or expressing themselves. Right. And so if you present trade-offs to say, okay, so what I've gathered from our conversation is that you're interested in direction A and direction B. Which of those should be the top priority that you want me focusing on over the next month? When you give them binary choices, you take off the cognitive load. You're not asking an open-ended question to say, but I need to understand what's top of mind for you right now. And then your boss goes on this 10-minute TED Talk about all of the things, and you're more confused than before.
I mean, I'm nodding my head here, not because of my boss, man. My boss is perfect. He's great, if you're listening. But because I think many of us have had that experience of trying to figure out how to deduce direction from somebody who feels pretty all over the place in organizations where everything feels urgent, right? And a lot of times in our organizations, everything feels urgent.
Right. And that trade-off approach is great for that, too, when you have to push back on requests and you can say, all right, again, so I've heard A and B are important. It's not possible to do both of those at once. Or you can ask, what would you like me to slow down on in order to make this new request possible? My suggestion would be this. Do you agree with that? If so, that's what I'll do going forward.
Right.
So again, you are shaping the direction of what's happening, not just kind of passively waiting and then complaining or getting frustrated that you're not getting the direction that you want.
You know, you're asking for a reframing, I think a very modern reframing of the very relationship between a boss. I don't even like that word, boss. Let's go with manager. A manager and one who is managed, right? And I came into a workforce that said the manager will give you the list of things to do. You do the things on the list. You try not to not do the things on the list, and then you move up. But today, in many of our more decentralized work environments, it's more of a collaboration, right? Your manager says, these are the priorities. Here's how I imagine that might work. And you have more to win from saying, these are the priorities that I heard you say. Here's how I imagine they're going to work, right?
Yes. The most successful people I have worked with, I have seen treat their leader, the relationship with their leader, they treat it as a partnership. And so much of what this book is about is really giving people the guide, the exact roadmap of how do you go from just someone who is an order taker and a subordinate to someone who is more of a partner. And that's really powerful because when you do that, you're equaling out the power dynamic. It's no more that this person is above me, which means they're right about everything.
Right.
It levels it out a little bit. And that's very empowering for you, and it's helpful to your manager.
And I'm just going to say, it can be hard.
Yeah.
It can be hard psychologically if we've grown up in an environment that doesn't set that out, or if we're working in a culture where that is not how things work. But doesn't mean that it's not actually very possible no matter what culture you are in. So you talk about alignment. Where else can we lean in here?
Yeah. The second conversation is styles. And this is great. We were talking about sort of difficult, let's call them difficult people a moment ago. And the styles conversation is about understanding someone's work preferences, someone's communication preferences, basically getting the operating system for them as a person. Because what I have found over the years is that when most people say, my boss is difficult, my boss is impossible, many times it comes down to a difference in styles.
Yep.
And I am not at all saying, this is disclaimer, there are very real toxic situations out there. That is not what I am talking about in this moment. But many times when someone says, all my boss cares about is the bottom line, and they're so short with me, they cut me off whenever I share an idea. Many times that's happening because you're dealing with what I would call a commander manager, someone who moves very quickly, who is more task-oriented than people-oriented, who cares about just the bullet points,
Right.
will get frustrated if you give a lot of context. When you are someone who may be more people-oriented, you want to talk about the process and the background. And so what happens is we talk past each other. And that leads to frustration on both sides. I had a client a few years ago who was pretty high up in her organization. She reported to the CEO. And she had worked with him for a few years now. And the relationship was just getting increasingly tense and just rocky. And so when she came to me, she said something that will stick with me forever. She said, in my last one-on-one, what my boss said to me was, I don't know if you're incompetent, scattered, or both. And it was just like punch in the gut. And she said to me, should I just quit? And, walking her back off the ledge and unpacking it, what we realized is that she was working for this highly commander type manager. And her coming to her one-on-ones with sort of a laundry list of all the problems she was tackling and really wanting to brainstorm with him, he was so frustrated with that because he wanted her to come with, okay, here's the progress we've made. Here's the plan for what's next. Here's what I am doing. Is that okay with you? And just get his blessing to go run with it. And when she just started making some of the tweaks in the book, instead of sending him long email chains, she would text him. And then she would be able to get a response in a couple of hours versus days, which she felt better about. And flash forward, it took time. None of this is an easy button overnight.
Right.
It took time, but about a year later, she called me up and said, you won't believe this. He just gave me a 6-figure bonus and said that I am his partner in this. And so it was like a complete 360 just because of the way she had tweaked her own style. She didn't totally give up her style. She just tweaked it so that she could get through to him. Her ideas would actually land with him.
Okay, Melody, I just want to go into one piece of that equation, that story that is so critical. When you are in that place, and as you said it, my heart just sort of opened because I have personally been in that place where you are getting feedback, direct feedback that you're just not very good at your job, right? You're scattered. I don't know if you're incompetent or scattered. Before you can just jump to changing your style, you need to figure out how to tell yourself that you are not scattered and that you are not incompetent and that you have something to contribute. So it seems to me like the most important thing this woman did is go and find herself an outside consultant, right? A coach in your case, but somebody to help her do the work of figuring out what her true story was and then working better.
It's hard. It's hard when you are the one in it every single day. You begin to go back to that story of what's wrong with me. Everyone else around me seems to have it figured out. But when you can have someone who has been in the trenches, who has seen this pattern happen with, hundreds of people over time, and who can be more objective about the situation and challenge your thinking. One of my favorite questions to ask my clients is, how is this situation for me instead of against me? And I get some pushback on this on LinkedIn where, I think it's very popular to talk about bad bosses, difficult bosses. Everyone loves to pile on with that. And again, those situations exist. When you think about having a difficult boss, not everyone can leave tomorrow. That's just not a reality.
Right.
And so I think it can be dismissive to tell people, well, your manager doesn't respect you. You should find something better. Yes, you should. And also, that's not a reality for most people. And it may not be able to happen tomorrow. And so we have to deal with the situation as it is. And what I want to encourage people to think about is if you find yourself in that situation, asking, how is this for me instead of against me? Mm-hmm. The skills you are going to be forced to learn when you're dealing with a tough manager, whether it's negotiation, persuasion, it's influence, it's prioritization, all of those things are going to serve you no matter where you go. Yeah. Because whether next time it is your manager who is difficult, or it's a cross-functional partner, or it's your skip level leader, you're going to encounter people that are different or who you perceive as difficult. And so if you can look at it as those tough situations having meaning and value behind them, it can make it just a little bit more tolerable.
Yeah. Okay. So conversation number 3.
Conversation number 3 is the ownership conversation. Mm-hmm. And this is number 3 because I think a lot of us find ourselves feeling powerless at work, where there are problems we see, there are challenges around us, but we feel like we can't change them. We can't affect them in any way.
Yeah.
So the ownership conversation is, number 1, how do you identify a worthwhile problem to focus on? All problems are not created equal. And number 2, how do you pitch that to your manager in a way that makes it more likely for them to say, go ahead and run with that. I trust you to do that.
So another way to think about that is, how do you identify what the right work to work on is? In a world where there's a lot of work, and I think sometimes a mistake that we make is thinking that the right work to work on is the work that we already know how to do, or that we ourselves feel inspired by. And instead of taking that step back moment to say, okay, well, what's the end goal of my organization? And if I'm going to put my energy toward this product, is this one that's going to help me to get seen and get ahead here?
Yeah. There's this concept of promotable work. And promotable work, by an easy definition that I think of it as, what is something that creates a triple win? Creates a win for you, whether you enjoy it, it's building your resume and your skill set. Creates a win for your manager, will make them look good, advances their priorities, and is a win for the organization. How does it impact the bottom line of the business? And I think, like you were saying, sometimes the best work is going to be at the intersection of those 3 things, not overly weighted in one or another.
Yeah. Okay, so we're on conversation number 4 here. What's number 4?
Number 4 is the feedback conversation. And it's like, dun, dun, dun.
I have to say, you say feedback, and my eyes roll a little bit because that word just gets so misused.
Yes. Yeah. And it's loaded, right? Because most of the time, the feedback we want to give our manager is about their personality, is about how they are doing things. And we either avoid it completely and then the problem only grows, or we get frustrated or burn out trying to compensate for it.
Right.
Or we approach it maybe in not the most tactful way and it hurts our relationship with our manager. So how do we do it differently? You have to start by identifying the A, B, C's. So first, what is the assumption you are making about your boss's behavior? What is the actual observable behavior? And then what is the change you want to see? So let's just walk through an example of that. So let's say your assumption is usually the label you're putting on the situation. My boss is a micromanager. My boss never gives clear direction. My manager favors other people over me. That is the assumption you're making. The next part is probably the most important. What is the specific observable behavior that confirms that assumption?
Right.
That's what we want to focus on. So if it's micromanagement, the observable behavior might be my boss is asking to be CC'd on administrative emails that I really should be able to send. Okay, that's the behavior. And then last, what's the change you want to see? Because you can't go into this conversation and just drop you're a micromanager and that's not working for me.
Yeah.
You can't do that. You need to propose some sort of path forward to keep the conversation being solution focused. And so your conversation may be in our next one-on-one, how about I put together a plan for the things I can oversee independently versus some ideas where I think I still need your oversight.
Yeah.
That may be the change. When you open these conversations, it's important to establish some sort of shared goal. You want to think about putting yourselves on the same side of the table against the problem versus you against the other person. It's sort of grounding the feedback in something both people can get on board with, which hopefully can make the conversation less defensive.
Yeah. And moving away from the defensive and to the position of, hey, we have the same goal. Let's figure out how to get it together is so important, right? And part of that is depersonalizing it, which goes back to styles. But take us to that fifth conversation.
Fifth conversation is the boundaries conversation.
Yay.
Yes. Now, this one is all about how do you push back? How do you say no? You are always going to have situations where you're being asked to take on extra work. You're being asked to go to additional meetings. You are being asked to turn around something in an unreasonable time frame. How do you balance pushing back, respecting yourself and your time while also being a team player?
Yeah. So that's easy, right?
Very easy. So simple. I would say the first thing you have to do is dig deeper. There is a lot of talk out there about just say no at work, protect your energy, which is great. And no is a complete sentence in many, many, many parts of life. In the workplace, unfortunately, if you were just to say to your boss, no, I'm not doing that.
Right.
It's not exactly going to go over well. And so what I usually recommend is asking questions first, digging deeper before you just give an immediate response. And this does two things. Number one, it helps you vet the request because you never know. You may be asked to sit in on a meeting that's going to give you exposure to a VP that you've been wanting to build a relationship with.
Right.
And you may not know that on the face of it. And through asking questions, you may also be able to get more details that allow you to latch onto something to justify your no.
Yeah.
To say, oh, actually, this would be a better fit for the marketing team to take over. Let me get in touch with them and I can loop them in on this. So asking questions first, it shows that you're thoughtful, you're being strategic, you're not just giving a flat out no. And it allows you to assess, could this actually be something I want to agree to?
Right. You know, as you say boundaries, I think about how, again, there is a difference between how you self-manage and then how you manage up. And it is most critical for you to understand your own boundaries. And then secondarily, once you have a sense of your boundaries, communication about those boundaries actually becomes easier. It becomes more succinct. And usually it's not about saying no, right? And what you articulate there in so many ways is about clarity, right? Always striving for deeper clarity with the person who is managing you, who you said at the very outset of this conversation is meant to be understood as your partner, right? And maybe that's all managing up is. Maybe managing up is reframing your relationship with the person who shares work with you as a partner and then communicating with them as clearly as you possibly can.
Yes. And this is where we start to see the conversations really interlock with one another. Because what you're referring to, and we didn't talk about this a little earlier, is the fact that the styles conversation actually is two parts. So if we go back to conversation 2, yes, you want to understand your manager's preferences. How often do they want to be communicated with? What channels? All of that sort of stuff. But it's also important for you to get clear on that for yourself. And so there's an entire exercise I have in the book called the Me Manual, which is where, whether you share it or not, you are taking time to understand, what are my boundaries? What is the work I like doing the most? What types of constraints do I have around my work hours? If someone is trying to share information with me, how do I learn that best? Do I want questions ahead of the meeting, or am I okay with spontaneous brainstorming? All of those sorts of questions and that insight helps you understand, why might I take things personally or get triggered and frustrated by certain people's behaviors. And going back to what you said about clarity, allows you to articulate, hey, actually, my preference would be this. Is that possible? Yeah. And to do it in a non-emotionally loaded way.
So much of what it means to manage up is to have a handle on your own set of insecurities and know how to manage yourself with compassion, grace, and most importantly, with agency.
Yeah. It comes back to realizing you have value to offer. And what's important there is that your business value is different from your personal worth as a person.
That was Melody Wilding, author of Managing Up. You can find it wherever books are sold, and in it you will find lots more practical advice that you can put to use right away. Now, there are 3 things that I need you to walk away with this week. The first thing, write this down. Managing up is a learnable skill set. Maybe you think you're not very good at it. It's only because you haven't learned to do it, you haven't practiced it. You can learn this. Number 2, the biggest thing that you need to learn in order to be good at this is effective communication styles. Maybe you think you know something about communication. You probably do if you listen to this show. We're big communicators on this show, aren't we? But you can always be better at it. And finally, number 3, know yourself. Sounds easy, right? Hardly. Understand your boundaries, understand your communication style, understand that a lot of times if there's a conflict between you and your manager, it's not you. Literally, it's not you. It might be your communication style, it might be your manager's work style, but those things are not fundamentally who you are. And you can address them if you understand the style issues, if you understand boundaries, and if you keep your eyes on the prize, growth. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm sure you have all kinds of ideas about managing yourself. Managing up, managing down, managing sideways. It's all on the table this week at office hours. I hope you'll join us. Every Wednesday afternoon at 3 p.m. Eastern, Sarah Storm, our senior producer, joins me. We go live on the LinkedIn news page. You can always find us in the show notes, or you can just follow me on LinkedIn, and we would love to see you there. Now, if this episode was useful to you, and if you are right now thinking about one person, maybe a person who works for you, who would do well to think about how they could manage up, that's manage you, send it to them. I'm Jessi Hempel. This is Hello Monday. See you next week. What were you nervous about today before you came in? Or were you nervous about nothing?
Having the right things to say.
Really?
Yeah. My perfectionism is, oh my gosh, am I going to mess up? Am I going to have valuable things to say? And yeah, so that was like number 1.